I actually realized that it's not surprising at all that we see this spike in domestic violence.
I think that these conversations are very important, and also particularly also to give some context related to the different countries and
human nature. I mean, if you suppress all that, you probably need a valve at some point.
I welcome you all to this roundtable discussion on the topic COVID-19 and its impact on violence on women, which is being organized by WahWoman. I'm Rajni Vora, founder of WahWoman and host and moderator of the day. The side effects of COVID-19 can be seen in various ugly forms in different stages of life, including financial, social, emotional, and psychological aspects. And one of the undeniable fact is the spike in violence against women and girls, particularly domestic violence, has intensified during COVID lockdown and restricted movements to curb the infection rate. In this roundtable conversation, we will try to figure out what, why, and how the current situation due to COVID-19 exacerbates gender-based violence from psychological and sociological perspective with an objective to create an awareness among societies to change the response towards the victim of gender-based violence and seeking possible solutions. Joining me in this roundtable conversation, three distinguished guests I have with me. Our first guest, Elke Esders, comes from Germany. She is a social innovation consultant, a professional coach, and group facilitator, combining an experience of 23 years as an advisor and consultant in international organizations like UN, Geneva, and European Parliament, Brussels, with 20 years of coaching experience. Thank you so much, Elke, for being here. Our second guest is from Portugal, Marisa Monterio Bosrboom. She is a lawyer and human rights advocate. She got her domestic violence training in 2004 while passing 1 year as volunteer of the Portuguese Victim Support Association, APAV. Since then, she always advocates for creating awareness and solutions that can save lives. Currently, she is the founder of Brave Women Alliances, a think tank, part of Humanity of Things agency that is concerned in changing the narratives to be able to change the outcomes, including focus on violence literacy. Thank you, Marisa, for being here. And last but not the least, our third guest, Antje Bauer, again a German national based in Pune, India. Antje is a leadership and team coach, mentor, trainer, facilitator, and speaker in Pune, working primarily with corporate clients with 30 years of leadership in agrochemical industry, Syngenta. There are 4 years of building up and managing a global competency center in Pune. She is also a member of board and regional lead, a pack of Thrive with mentoring, a non-profit focused on supporting the development of business women through mentoring relationships. I welcome all three of you wholeheartedly and thank you so very much for being here and joining on this conversation. So let me quickly begin this discussion with a very, very fundamental question. It's very basic about the reasons, the possible reasons and the factors according to you are causing spike in domestic violence cases. Anybody can.
I'm happy to start. So when I prepared for our conversation and I thought this through, I actually realized that it's not surprising at all that we see this spike in domestic violence. And I think everywhere across the globe, no matter where, no matter whether you are talking very industrialized societies or more developing societies. Because I think the first thing that happened is that many of us were isolated in their homes, isolated either alone, but in the majority of cases, in unison with several people. So normally it's a family or a couple or an extended family living together. In that isolation, many people experienced an unusual proximity. They had no breathing space because there was nowhere to go during the lockdown. They couldn't even leave the house. And then all this kind of this vicious circle started of of expectations, who does what, and maybe not verbalizing them. So there are disappointments, there is some unreflected anger, probably some substance and alcohol abuse, and kind of distancing and people losing it on each other. So I think there was probably a gradual buildup of aggression in most families or couples, and in some of them, of course, that exploded. Yeah, that's where I would leave it right now.
Shall I request Marisa?
Yes, I was trying actually to understand if I was hearing correctly because the sound was. First of all, thank you so much for having me to have this conversation with this amazing colleagues in the table that have so much experience. I always think that these conversations are very important, and also particularly also to give some context related to the different countries and the different scenarios, because I think we have a tendency nowadays to speak very globally, and that is creating actually a very strange reality, like what happens in a particular country, even in a particular area of a particular country, sometimes is not the reality in the rest of the country. So I think we need to go from global problems, but also tackle them from local perspectives. That said, I am Portuguese, as you said, but I live in the Netherlands. And even in domestic violence basis, the scenario is very different. And actually, when I came to the Netherlands, I volunteered for quite some years in an organization that sadly it didn't survive because it was not able to have enough volunteers, unfortunately. That was an organization called Arise NL, and it was founded by a foreigner victim, and it was supported by foreigner volunteers living in the Netherlands, and focus especially in this kind of victims, because we forget always that also your where you are in society has some impact. And actually, it's very interesting to understand that for foreign women living abroad, the isolation was already a pre-pandemic scenario. You are not with your family. You are in a culture that you do not know. And when you don't even know the language, for example, isolation strikes. So I can even talk in first hand, because when I came, I was not victim of domestic violence, but I understood, I have the empathy of understanding the isolation of being, you see. So I think this context is very important to understand then what happened in the pandemic. So, and being a mother myself, hearing all the reasons that were already put through, I add one of the biggest elements of tension generated in this pandemic. That was, for example, children or people that need special care, because you are already not able to care for yourself, and then you have the tension of creating of taking care of others. And for couples who had young children, or for instance homeschooled children, the level of toxicity was immense, even for normal couples. So that's, I think that's the message, and a little bit of compassion for everybody, is that it was really too hard. I have a picture that I took to have a laugh in a few years, that I have my child with his hand like this because he didn't want to learn his class. And I'm also like this because my husband took me a picture, and I'm like this. And I compared, like, this is what we're going to remember. Everybody was frustrated. So you can see that normal couples that were almost in the break, and now you take to situations of people that have less capacity to deal with their own mental issues, you have an explosive combination. So I think we need to, of course, we need to talk about domestic violence as a problem, but I think more and more you will understand nuances of violence. And I think we are shifting some paradigms, even of areas that are not so traditional as someone is, for instance, hitting the other person. Can also be a woman hitting a man, as we know. Victims are victims, or for instance, even the violence against elderly. In Portugal, for example, there was a really terrible case during the pandemic because a son was filmed hitting his senior father of 80 something years old in a car, you see. So I think also we have a tendency to have narrow conversations, and I think we need to bring the complexity of the topics, and for me it's about also knowing human nature. We keep promoting world peace, but emotions are in all of us, so the good and the bad, and being aggressive, or everything is here in all of us. So in the right environment, they explode. So I think what we had was a very lethal combination of factors that cost tremendously. And of course, depending on the countries, depending on the level of capacity, education, and all of that, then you had also different levels of problems and consequences from.
We would love to hear Elke's perspective as well on this very question.
Yeah, thank you very much. Also, thank you very much for the invitation from my side. And I want to connect to what Marisa said, the human nature, because I've been reflecting about the psychological impact of what has been created. Just imagine that for more than a year, everything that's fun and joy and creativity has been prohibited. So, and the human nature, I mean, if you suppress all that, you probably need a valve at some point. And I could imagine that creates domestic violence. But just imagine kids, and you mentioned the kids as well, are not allowed to play. We are not allowed to celebrate together, singing together, which is, of course, a healing, has a healing effect on the human nature and on psychology, and which calms us down and which creates love. Everything has been prohibited. And maybe as to creativity and independent thinking, you probably know these studies from the corporate world where they say that the brightest ideas arise around the coffee machine, where people meet coincidentally, and then they have a chat, an informal chat, and then they come up with a bright idea. Nothing of the kind. On the contrary, we have been held, and us still are, under a constant fear-mongering every day from morning to night. So what does that create in the human mind as a collective? That is one thing. And the other thing, as to violence and also domestic violence, I would also count suicides in that. And we hear from emergency workers that they are called to intervene much more often than before because of suicide cases. And the government prohibited to publish the statistics of last year. And we can only guess why that is the case. So that is what I want to say to this question.
Great. Thank you so much, Elke. And while we are trying to discover possible reasons that are leading to increased level of violence, that includes, of course, financial insecurity, stress, future uncertainty, because most of the people are working from home. So the kind of space they used to have, two people used to have, especially people who were already in strained relationship, now that space is not existing anymore. And interesting fact that I came across, which states that 1 in 3 women experience physical or sexual violence mostly by an intimate partner, and these are according to very genuine, valid reports. So violence like anger, aggression have always been there, and it is very true that this situation has only intensified it. So in this entire context and analysis, I think two words, power and control, because the person who is earning in your family, if he could be he or she but in many cases it is he, and he if that person is the primary or sole bread earner, somewhere most of the people develop sense of entitlement, and that sense of entitlement is very strong, which gives you sense of control and power. How would you reflect on these two words in relation to this very context of violence during COVID times? Can we start it with Marisa?
Look, as I said in the beginning, we really need to contextualize violence. It's not the same thing. The conversation of me being a Portuguese married with a Dutch in a culture that is different but still similar in the way we treat each other is completely different, for instance, from someone that has another culture, even living in the Netherlands. See? So I think now what we saw in the pandemic is all of this got on steroids because it had the proper element. And as we know, violence is also based in this, as you mentioned, in power. It's really always about power dynamics in a way, because you cannot be violent if you are not able to control and to have this power in a way, or you can be stopped. Or so what I understand is that every case is very unique. We have a tendency to think, oh, for instance, in the traditional scenario, man versus woman, and then the man is the sole provider of the house, and then he controls also related to money, for example, because then the person doesn't have choices in her life or whatever reason. Sometimes you still have the violence and you don't have this economical control. And that's what I mean. We have this tendency to create a one-path narrative. And I think that, especially in COVID, what you saw is that the non-traditional dynamics also generates violence. So it's not in a pandemic moment where people are in a confined space. The traditional formula of economic power control, the loots. I think it's so much more like being in a prison and a dynamic between prisoners, and the confinement on itself played a big role. I think, I don't have data to support what I'm saying yet, but I think, and I'm not going to do the typical men thing, I think that the people that were more aggressive by nature, that had more to control,
They got more
emotions
opportunity.
like rage,
Yeah.
were, that you saw that, like normally they say give power to a person and you see their true nature. I think here we can start creating a new saying, confine people, and you will see a different side of them that they didn't even understood. I like I say, compassion is very important at this point. I saw myself in a very different way, because the mental pressure of being such scenario was overwhelming. So treating things that are different as different, I think it's something that we will also learn with this pandemic. But don't interpret me bad. Like, what I want to say is, of course, the power dynamics that already exist, and especially in cultures where women or whatever victims, we also need to understand that, for instance, in a man-man relationship, you also have a lot of violence. So it's in our nature, no matter the dynamics. And some cultures have a tendency to sometimes create situations that are more likely to generate this unbalanced relationships of respect, and of course all those elements of money, control, personalities, they all contribute to this. But that's, I think it's an easy place to go. See, it's the first step to try to justify the unjustifiable. And again, COVID is such a different element, even with normal consequences of domestic violence. But I think you have a whole new spectrum of realities that were born under this ecosystem, this habitat for even mental problems, you know, like of emotional emotional unease or profound loss of this equilibrium that we would like to all have.
Right. Thank you so much, Marisa. Elke or Antje?
Yeah, Elke, do you want to go?
No, you go ahead, Antje. Thank you.
So I'll reflect a bit differently on this. And that's mainly influenced on my living in a country which has a very, very different societal development, is at a very, very different societal development level than the country that I come from, right? So I come from Germany, live in India. If I start with the term power, I mean, power as such, if you think of it neutrally, is nothing bad. But I think in the context of domestic violence, power very quickly gets a very negative connotation because it gives an individual more rights, or an individual takes more rights than other individuals, right? So has power over them. If I think about control has two sides, right? There's the control of yourself and there's the control of other people. And again, it's a term which per se is neutral. It's not a bad thing to control something. Sometimes we need to control something. But I think if I look at what I have not experienced any domestic violence, I have to say, well, first of all, and I'm very lucky because I spent the entire lockdowns in the countryside, which is a very, very different experience than being in a city. So I think there's a big divide between people who live in flats in cities and people who live in houses with gardens or in the countryside where nobody cares if someone wears a mask or is inside or outside. But I think in the context here, what I have observed is that there is a big difference between people who have evolved to reflect themselves, to question themselves, to be able to have critical dialogues with other people, and people who are almost like exposed in an unprotected way to their feelings, and who as such do not have control over their feelings. And of course, then if they don't have control over their own feelings, how can you expect them to control how they behave versus others, right? And what I see here a lot, much, much more than I ever saw in Europe or elsewhere, is anger. Really, really dangerous anger. In young men, a lot. I mean, that you read about everywhere, I think, but it's very, very present in young men. But even in my coaching practice, I hear a lot of mature men or mature women come to me and ask for advice around how to deal with anger. And I mean, you know, Elke, you will know, anger is an expression of, is a secondary feeling. So it's, you always have to look a level deeper. And if you, in a society like here, I think people are just completely exposed to that. There are no norms. And in the confinement, I really like what you said, Marisa, that's like in a prison, there is nobody external to control that. Nobody who can say, hey, calm down. You know, the societal control is gone. So it just magnifies itself or multiplies itself. And I don't have the depth on all the different situations, or I'm not even sure it matters if who is being violent to whom, whether it's man, woman, child, parent, or whatever. Violence is violence. It doesn't really matter whom it is done to. And I think here it happens a lot. I mean, from what I read, what I hear, probably a lot more than in other places also. I mean, I see it here in the villages, but I think here in the villages, violence is the norm in relationships, in family relationships, and it wasn't any different in COVID. Maybe because some people who usually would have gone to work stayed put in their village, and there's a lot of alcohol influence. So that, of course, again, is something which just makes it even worse. But yeah. Elke.
Yeah, very, very interesting, Antje, and I'm glad you talked first because I can report about kind of contrast programs with two elements that are new to me. One is that from the beginning, let's say April last year onwards, we have a constantly growing citizens movement for democracy and for citizens' freedoms. And that is a very, very peaceful movement. And I have watched other demonstrations before in years past. But what is new to me is that you have many leading, let's say, it doesn't even have to be the leading people in these demonstrations, who are very spiritual, who preach love, who say, just go and sit in the street and meditate and do, and that is completely new to me, and it gives me goosebumps because I love it so much. And at the same time, and now I come to the violence, and that is new for me as well, we have equally growing number of police trying to chase these people away. I mean, whenever these peace workers come, sometimes you have a bigger number of police there, but not every time, of course, because we get huge masses of people in the streets. But what I've seen, particularly in Berlin, is that the Berlin police is, in our capital, is particularly violent. And it is citizens who record that on their mobile phones because their newspapers don't report on that. And I've seen horrible scenes, honestly, and particularly, Ranji, against women. So they even, you must imagine that they press a woman just to make to give an example and to state, hey, we the police, we are very harsh, and if you don't obey, then this is what we do. So they press the woman on the ground, and then three men, highly with weapons and with helmets on, sit on her. And they even once they had a pregnant woman, and there were the other people were shouting, she's pregnant, and then they were just standing there and saying, your message arrived. But they didn't let her go. And this is shocking. I've never seen that before. Maybe it did exist before and I wasn't aware of it. But you have really these immense contrasts between peace and love and meditation and spirituality on the one hand, and the Berlin police really getting violent against that.
Indeed. For during these times, in your personal life or something happening around you that you could share with us, example of violence, or if somebody came to you for seeking any help, something like that, would you like to share?
Oh, I can. I think we all have situations. Look, I come from a very different country from the Netherlands. They have the expression the macho Latino, and Portuguese men are always this men, they are very much in control. And it's a society where the numbers of women dying are still quite alarming for what should be a very peaceful country. So it's a contradiction. A very peaceful country in a way, but women die in such a high level numbers. And again, it's the culture of even passionate crimes. And so it's such a weird scenario then comparing to what is, for instance, the relationship between women and men in the Netherlands, and even there's a less hierarchy. So I do understand that I benefit from seeing so different worlds and living it. And I can tell you that in all my life, I was slapped once by a boy in high school, once. And I look back and I think it's really weird because I was 13 and I still remember. And looking back, I had practiced karate and I was quite a strong girl. And he was a tiny weeny guy that was actually boys made fun of him, you see. And I think we forget that most of these aggressors or this behavior are from people that have really self-respect issues, and they are actually normally very much cowards. And because they cannot reach their physical counterparts like men, they cannot fight because they are weak. They see the weakest link close to them, and he wanted to feel like very macho. And then I was teasing him, like, because I have like a big voice. I'm very tiny, but I always had a very big voice. And he slapped me. And looking back, I saw that I was not trained to hit back. I should have hit him back because I could, by the way. I was stronger than him. In my mind, I was just not capable of hitting anybody because I was taught that you don't hit anybody. So I was so shocked that I could not react. And that, I think, maybe it was the beginning of my fights for human rights, that deep embarrassment. I felt so hurt, and it was just a slap. Don't get me wrong. I was not beaten or anything, but it hit me bad in my soul, and especially because I did not react. That was even worse, you see? And therefore, from all of this, since then, I became, first of all, very fierce to men. I know that I even, in a confrontation, I will be the first one reacting more typically like a man. I would not even avoid physical confrontation, you see, and that protect me as a person. And then I tried to do that with everybody when I was young. I remember to be in Portugal in a scene in a coffee, and someone, a guy was really trying to push the girlfriend, and I physically got into the middle. You see, I lost completely the notion of danger even to myself, but I call it the good rage. These things make me feel rage. Every time I feel someone trying to hit another person, even, I feel personally affected. And Elke was talking about the police in the Netherlands because of the vaccines. There was a terrible scene where police hit two women that were peacefully there, and they hit them with no excuse. And you see that something is wrong there. So it's not just in couples. Yeah. So what you then see in couples is something more deeper, like an iceberg that is in many men. And when the opportunity is there, either they are a police, either they are the husband or the boyfriend, this thing comes and they hit you as a valve sometimes. You see, that we were talking about the valve. Mm-hmm. We become their punch bag. And because I managed to understand all of this, and I managed to understand a little bit the emotions of anger and the human nature and all of that, then I became a lawyer. And I tried to support, from the legal point of view, clients that were victims, but in a total different way. I never tell to a client, oh, the police, oh, a restraining order. Not at all. I don't believe in the system. I say it publicly. I don't believe in the system. And actually, if we want to change the narrative, we need to start teaching girls and hopefully boys the same, how not to become a victim. And we want to talk about peace, but like in martial arts, to be able to have peace, you know how to defend yourself, even physically. So if you need to defend yourself and then attack in order to defend your integrity, you need to know how. And nobody is really doing that. I had self-defense classes in karate. How many girls do you know, or even boys, that have self-defense classes? This should be basic for everybody. We should have tools to defend our integrity, body and mind, by the way. So that's why I'm so passionate in the sentence, let's change the narrative. What we did till now was necessary, but now we need a shift. What we are doing is not enough, and we have many years, as Elke knows, and everybody that is working with women's rights, with human rights, it's time to go to the next step. Let's put people, let's really empower them. Let's put girls, not only coding, because now it's the trend, they need to know tech. Let them know physical capacities of responding if they are attacked. You know, this should be basic. And we keep saying, oh no, but they need to respect them. They need to respect them. Yes, that's expecting the better, but prepare for the worst. Are we preparing? No, not at all. And then have also the courage to get united. For instance, what happened in Berlin and happened in The Hague, it's up to us, women, to say enough and report to these cases where police bluntly uses women like punches. And like Elke say, let's sit in these women. Let's put it. It's about humiliation. It's not even anymore for the physical pain. It's the humiliation and the structures of power and the dynamic of power. It's so much more than a slap. It's about humiliating and controlling and take advantage of. And women need to have women and men and everybody, but traditionally the numbers talk female. So we need to change the narrative with tools, effective tools, plan B. So when a client comes to me as a lawyer, I always start thinking practically. Even prepare a way for her to run away from the house. I immediately start telling her, do you have a family abroad? Let's start thinking differently. We are not taking this as we should. And this is so much more complex that say you should stop, or you have a restraining order, or if you beat someone, you go to jail. It does not change the culture of violence, and we need to have different approaches to this.
Totally.
I'm sorry, you see how much passionate I feel about
I truly appreciate
this.
it. This is what we need to see here. Because women like you, you know, who are leaders, who are role models, they have to have this kind of passion while they are expressing themselves. So thank you so much.
Yes, I loved every word you said, Marisa. Thank you very much. So my experience was I worked at the European Parliament for 23 years as a political advisor. And as you know, politics can be quite a harsh terrain. Yeah. Now, I must say, and be fair, that at the international level, it is softer than at the national level, because you have various cultures coming together and rubbing themselves off. So there is a specific softness there, but still it remains politics, and you still have party politics and the rest of it. But coming from that, I then became coach. And as a coach, I realized that the way we do politics is counterproductive. Yeah. It's completely wrong, but and nobody ever cared. And as it is, you probably know that experience as well. Once you start seeing something differently, you need people who have the same experience. So that is what happened to me. And I found people all over Europe, I stayed in Europe for that, who have started doing politics differently. And when I say differently, it means with a different mindset as a start, And that comes along with what you said, Marisa. We need a different mindset. Also because for them, it went without saying that citizens need much more say, independently of if they belong to a party or not. And I found various new models, I called them, all over Europe, where a whole town operated differently, or a whole region, or maybe even a country like Portugal that I depicted on the website, who tried to have a participatory budget for citizens at the national level. So that is my experience with, and I found it important to see that the mindset had changed. And what is happening now with me, I created this website, as I said. I'm now being contacted by people here in Germany who have created a new party. Now, I must say, and I told them so as well, I'm not a believer in political parties any longer at all. They said, okay, we want to be at eye level with politicians because they don't hear us otherwise. And if we don't manage, we remain this movement and we become bigger and bigger. Elke, can you help me? So now I talked to them, and they invited me to talk to a bigger audience. And what I'm planning and to say, amongst other things, of how politics can be done differently, how your own mindset is supposed to be, and how they can maybe establish autocorrections between themselves, for themselves, but then also between themselves. And they belong to these people who are open to spiritual practices, and to also to work on themselves all the time. So I look forward to working with them, even though I told them I'm not going to become a member of a party, and they said that's fine.
Thank you so much, Elke.
So, first thing to say is that I have not really been approached by people who have been exposed to physical violence, but I have been approached, and I would say above average compared to other times, by people who sought help for developing themselves. So my experience was really that during the pandemic, during the lockdown, a lot of people, I think you could probably say, were confronted with themselves in a way that they have never been before. Through being confined to the home with only very few people to interact with, not being able to do all these fun things, go out that they do. So it's kind of, it's this huis clos situation where you're with yourself. So they have reached out for help. And I found that quite humbling, I must say, because I wasn't expecting it. I mean, in the coaching business is anyway a business which is where the market is more than saturated with coaches, and I was expecting the pandemic is everything's going to go down, 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 but it's actually been quite the opposite. So I found that a lot of these people who were sitting alone at home took the opportunity to work on themselves, maybe for the first time ever. Some of my coaches definitely, which I think is a positive thing. And I'm glad they've taken that time. And I'm now seeing the corporate customers kind of follow that, where many are suddenly coming, we want to use this lockdown time and offer something to our employees to lift their spirits, to develop them, etc. And it's funny because I was myself subject to a lot of Zoom fatigue. I was really fed up with being in Zoom meetings all the time. And I thought, are they really going to enjoy me doing another Zoom meeting with them? And they do. I mean, I've been giving a lot of courses, development courses the last few weeks. They do. They are very grateful for that. So in a way, it's an opportunity, but it doesn't relate directly to the domestic violence. That's just, and maybe just one thing on the domestic violence. I've mentioned to you, Rajni, I see a lot of it here in the village, but no different from non-COVID to COVID times, really. And the worst thing I observe is that nobody stands up for those who are subject to violence. It's an accepted means of human interaction here. So
True.
It's very difficult to do anything.
Yes, because the nature of this issue is very, very complex. It has
Yeah.
socio-cultural, stereotypical attitude.
Mm.
There are so many things which cannot be isolated from each other, and they work in tandem. It's not like
Mm.
that we are solving one problem, other problem would be automatically taken care of. That problem would remain there. So let me also understand now what mitigation strategies would you like to suggest in such a scenario where the nature of issue itself is very complex? We are going through very challenging times indeed, but how do we cope up with it to safeguard some?
I was saying that Elke, you were talking about policy, and I, being an independent person with no parties and tending to be like that for the rest of my life, I understand that policy is also the key. So it's why also the idea of the Brave Women Alliances as part of a civil society structure that could talk with policymakers without a party. I think we need to start claiming the agency of being citizens, and politics is politics and citizenship is citizenship. And I think in a crisis of policy, not policy but politics, because literally, or they are too polarized, or people don't believe anymore. I think citizenship can be actually an interesting path to take. But that said, I don't forget that I'm a lawyer, and I always come from that mindset. And not only what I mentioned about a plan B related to self-defense, practical things like, can we please make sure that people know how to defend themselves physically if they need, or mentally deal with this, and not try to avoid it, but already have this self-capacity to respond. But at the same time, I leave a suggestion. Let's imagine a different scenario. I love the futures of imagination scenarios. So imagine that policymakers would have stated in country X that if there's domestic violence, and I will take the normal traditional case for the purpose of this imagination, men hits women, his wife, and his wife goes to the police, and the police helps the wife to take the children to a place. So this is the scenario. But imagine that they had a legislator that says, no. This man is hitting this woman because he has clearly a mental issue, because a normal person doesn't hit anybody. So let's consider this as someone has like schizophrenia or any mental disease. Let's consider someone that hits someone as in the spectrum of mental health. If we consider then this person in the spectrum of mental health, let's not send this person to a house far away with children. Let's take the person that is not healthy mentally and put him in a place. So let's the person that was victim stay in her own house with her own children, and let's take this person that it's still the father of those children and for sure is not well, and give him a human treatment, a compassionate treatment, and take care of his mental health and remove him from the scenario.
Wow.
Would things have been changed? Would have the capacity to have less women in poverty, to less women that don't even know where to go, women that say, oh, but that refuge for women is full, we don't have the capacity to put you anywhere, this person is violent and he continues to try to chase you, but also nobody is taking care of him. If you would be having an addiction or a mental health problem, would you let him loose? So isn't it time for a different perspective in the matter potentially? And since the results are so bad, what do we have to lose if we would create a scenario where if you hit someone, we try to understand what happened with you as a human? What happened? How is your mental state that makes you, for instance, hit your wife in front of your kids? You are not well for sure. And if you are not well, we as a society, and every society has the criminals and the people that deserve, we as a society will treat you compassionately. We will remove you. We will assess you mentally, and we'll try to support you in getting better to go back to society.
You've
Let
got
your
my
wife
voice.
be. Yeah. So for me, about mitigation is, aren't we trying aren't we lacking creative capacity to reshift the narratives and the policies and the consequences to design a different way we approach things? Because in a new century, even prisons and all of this, isn't it time to think and rethink what we are doing and the outcomes of what we design? That's I leave with this question mark.
Thank you, Marisa. And you were saying something.
What I want to do now feels very boring. I like this kind of turning it around, looking at it the other way, Marisa. But I was going to say, for me, it all starts with education, and education at so many different levels that it's a huge task and can probably never be fulfilled. But there's education around the broad public, not to close their eyes and ears, right? Because a lot of violence could be stopped by neighbors if they just would ring the doorbell and intervene or something. Education that makes domestic violence not a private matter between people, but it is a criminal offense, but it's often treated like a private matter. And the other thing, educating women to define, express, and defend their boundaries. Because it doesn't start, I think, with self-defense. It starts much earlier than when it comes to a physical interaction, right? So, and then ultimately, yes, defense is also a part of it, but it's a huge, massive education effort, I think, which we can all contribute to. Because for me, the worst thing is this silent acceptance.
I really loved the point that you made, Antje, because education, the kind of education is generally imparted in societies, is probably not enough to change the mindset. Because like you rightly said, that education at different levels is necessary. Because I have seen domestic violence happening even in educated family.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay. Good. I definitely need to keep working on myself because I've had my moments as well, and which do not necessarily contribute to much love during this period. And I want to keep helping others also develop themselves further, because that is really what is needed now. We all need to work on ourselves to get into this new level of being and thinking and feeling where we are shifting. So that would be one thing. The other thing is I want to create ripple effects. So I want to use some notions, and I will start with the notion of self-responsibility. And I've got a group of 10 people together, and we start next week. We'll discuss what does it actually mean. And the idea is to have 3 consecutive meetings in weekly intervals, let's say, and really discuss what is self-responsibility for you. What are the downsides? Because there may be people who say, well, I love it. If the state doesn't do this, then I'll have to do it myself. Yeah, you will. And so, and what are the advantages? And what are the little things that, if you see an advantage, that you could do for yourself to increase your personal self-responsibility? And is there any step that you might want to take to increase someone else's self-responsibility? Because I think that is what we are lacking. So that is one of my ideas. And the group that I've got together, I saw one of the people told me, hey, can I do it next time with another notion? So we are creating ripple effects together then. And the other thing, and maybe that's interesting for you also, Antje, we have a number of coaches here now in Germany who realized how wrong these things are that we are all experiencing from the government and from the state. And they got together, and their intention is to heal society, to overcome the huge divide that has been created. To be honest, I have become a member of that, but I have not become actively involved yet. And they are called Dialogkultur. So these are the three things that I'm thinking of as mitigation.
Final word if you have before I wrap up this session.
Well, I leave for sure the availability to create ripple effects. Bravas, the Brave Women Alliance, Bravas think tank, it's part of Humanity of Things Agency. And the symbol is a butterfly. So we know that you have the ripple effect, but you also have the beautiful butterfly wings that can start a tornado. So I do think that it's time for agency. I do think it's time for human obligations in parallel to human rights. It's time for us to grow as understanding that we are part of everything all the time. There's no such thing. The government will take care. My neighbor will take care. Everybody takes care. I think the 21st century is a call for personal accountability. And with personal accountability, we will create much more impact, as Elke said. And it's about the small little twists and turns. Sometimes, today I met Elke. I'm in The Hague. She's in Berlin. It's about the connection. My power with her power becomes a double power. And it's to know structures of power, is to understand how they operate. And instead of feeling, as we most of all do, small and meaningless and powerless all the time, claim this capacity. We are capable. We will not change the world. We will not obtain world peace. That's also not in human nature. It's time to get real with ourselves. But how can we do better? How can we manage better? As Elke was saying, and talking the difficult talks that nobody wants to talk about. Let's get out of those beautiful, I want world peace, and what can I achieve in my lifetime? I'm 43. I hope I leave a world better for girls and boys as well. So time is ticking. We have an agency, a personal agency, and I'm always willing to connect my small little power to everybody else.
Yeah, thank you very much. My last word is that, Rajni, you and I, we've met before, but not very often. And the other three of us, we never met before. But there is such a connection and such a same wavelength that I'm really in awe and I'm really deeply moved. So I just say thank you very much. And
let me thank you once again for being here to hold such an important, relevant session. With such an insightful conversation. I truly appreciate you being here and taking time to share your valuable perspective from bottom of my heart. So thank you so much, Elke, Marisa, and Antje for being here.
Pleasure.
It's absolutely. Yeah,
okay.